Hello everybody, this is Danny from Deep South Homestead on Porch Time today. Just trying to get prepared with all this cold weather coming in. It's looks like we're going to have a whole week of it this week. We've already had some bad cold and it looks like we're going to have a lot more bad cold. But it's what it is, you know. But anyway, I was thinking about Porch Time today, and I really look at a lot of my comments and stuff, and I really contemplate the thought train that I see in people's comments as they put on down in the comment sections below of my videos. And I have come quickly to the conclusion that there's one common denominator out there that seems to be the focus of all people who are looking to homestead, and that is the home place. And as I begin to think about the home place, I begin to think, what is a home place? I mean, what constitutes a home place? And I quickly realized that very few old home places still exist. When I begin to really dig into it and do the looking and the research and everything into it, I quickly come to the conclusion that the old home places are gone, most of them. Now there's a few rare families out that pass their places on down from generation to generation, and they haven't sold. It's been in the family for hundreds of years. Now those, they're out there, but they're very rare. And guys, as I dug into this, it made me so sad. What actually happened, the best that I'm able to come up with, is progress, the Industrial Revolution, and things to this nature, the thought train that was given to us that we could have a better life, we could have an easier life, we could have stuff if we would just get on board with the new revolution coming into this country back in the early part of the 19th century. That's when it all actually began. Before then, people lived on homesteads, or they called it the old home place. A lot of them had large acreages and large families. Life was hard, to say the least. And yet, even though life was so hard, life was really good in a lot of ways. There was a lot more family interaction. There was a lot more interaction between neighbors. But as the Industrial Revolution began to kick in, and the thought process that was programmed into us in this country about you could have better, you could make more money, you could have an easier life, you could travel, you could do all these things. The younger generation, it appealed to them because of the hard toil of the old home place. The having to get up before daylight in the mornings to go out in all types of inclement weather and take care of animals, and then there was the crops that had to be tended, and then there was the loss of some crops and how hard it was to make it through the winters because it was so cold and there was little food sometimes, and all these things led mankind to believe that if he went to the cities and worked in the big factories, made the big money, and lived in cities, in neighborhoods and stuff like that, he could have a better life than he had on the old home place. The ironic part of this is, as I began to research a lot of stories and stuff, most of the people who went to the cities and lived in the urban areas when they got old and started to retire, they weren't comfortable living where they were living. And most would try to move back to their old home places, only to find them run down, dilapidated and stuff, but yet they still rebuilt on them. And when they went to pass it on to their kids, because they had lived in the urban areas, their kids stayed in the urban areas. And then when mom and pop died, or grandma and grandpa, the old home place was divided and subdivided and sold off to people who had money, usually developers and realtors and people just looking to get out of the city and to have a little place in the country. And the people who stayed in the hills and stayed on the old home places and made it go and worked the hard life, you couldn't have got them to have sold a piece of property if you'd have tried to sell it for 10 times what it was worth, because their mentality was, according to the stories that I've read, if I sell my land, where will my kids live? Where will my grandkids live? They'll have to go off and buy a piece of property and be in debt. And by the time my grandkids come along, why, who knows? They may not even be any land to sell, because my word, there's getting to be people everywhere. They're coming out of the cities like ants out of an ant bed to move up onto the land out in the country and taking it over. And they're destroying it. They're bringing with it the hustle and the bustle of the urban areas. There's no quietness anymore. Nothing seems to be peaceful like it used to be. Used to, you would hear the turkeys gobbling in the hills, and you'd hear a cow mooing in the background, or the turkeys gobbling, or the chickens cackling. And all these things would be taking place. But now that the urban people have moved out into the countries, all you hear is traffic, because they came in and they paved the roads. And the cars are flying up and down the roads now. And you hear motorcycles, and you hear four-wheelers, and you hear all these things now that you used to didn't hear. And it sure did change life as we knew it on the old home place. Because you see, the people who live on the old home places is a special breed of people. They don't necessarily care if they have an abundance of everything. They don't necessarily care if life is easy. They love the life they live because of the peace, the serenity, the reward that it gives them. And they've come quickly to learn that true happiness and true peace doesn't come through lots of money. It comes through contentment. Because you see, many of the people on the old home places were religious people. They went to a Sunday service and they understood what the Bible said when the Apostle Paul said to be content in whatever state you're in. They got that concept. But the media and the mainstream and the Industrial Revolution painted a picture in people's mind that life was better outside the old home place because you could have more stuff. You could do more. You could make money. You didn't have to struggle. You didn't have to get out and plow them old fields. Let the farmers do that. They got the equipment. And just go to the store and buy your food. Isn't that a much easier life for you to live without the toil and the turmoil? That was what was portrayed to the American rural areas. through the use of television. And as a result of that, so many people moved out away from the old home places, and they just rotted down. Because you see, a house is a living organism. A house lives and it breathes. You put people in a house and you let them live in it, and a house will last for generations and generations, as long as someone's living in it. But you take the people away, and within a matter of years, the house just decays and it begins to fall apart. Because the house itself is alive. It lives as long as the people in it live. But when the people in it cease to exist, then the home ceases to be a home. And it ceases to exist, and it breaks down just like the human body breaks down with age. So you see, there's a lot more to the old home place than what meets the eye. And what I'm seeing in the homesteading community today is the simple fact that there's a lot of people now, young people especially, and middle-aged people, and some older people, that have come to the realization that the life that they've been living is just not worth it, and they want to go back to a home place. They're looking for a place to call a home place for their children, because they've gotten caught up in this rat race of a world that we live in, this fast-paced society, and they've quickly come to realize that it's not all it's cracked up to be. And now what we've ran into is that there's very few places out there that's left that we can call a home place, because of the fact of realtors and progress and all these types of things like this. Land has become extremely expensive, and without lots of money, it's very difficult to afford a piece of property that's big enough to call a home place. Because if you have to go back and realize, most of what's called the old home places consisted of many acres of land. Your nearest neighbor may be a quarter of a mile or a half a mile away from you. Not 100 yards right there in front of you, or not 50 yards from you, or not 20 yards from you. They were a quarter of a mile to a mile, some of them further than that. And if you needed a neighbor would help you. If you had a crop coming in and there was some reason you couldn't get it all harvested, your neighbors would drop what they were doing. They would come and help you on your place. They never asked anything in return. They were just glad to help. And in return, if you saw your neighbors doing something, you would go and do the same thing. If you saw a neighbor's animal out, you would stop what you were doing and you would go and catch the animal if the neighbors didn't realize it was out or they weren't home, and you would bring it to your place and you would house it until they came home, and then y'all would take the animal back over there and give it back to them. No charge. You just did it because you were a neighbor. But the world we live in today, you let an animal get loose, people are screaming because some animal has walked in their yard or it is on their property. Now there's a difference in a homesteading animal and people who are careless with stuff. Because you see, the world we live in today, people think dogs have the right to rule and reign everywhere. I have a dog. My dog stays in a pen. And when I turn him loose, he has a collar on that if he gets out of hand, I can bring him back into control until he learns to be obedient. But he doesn't leave my property. My property is completely fenced. But yet there are people out there that seem to think that their animals should have the right to just roam anywhere that they want to. And if they come on your property and one of them happens to kill your stuff, then their opinion of that is, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. I'll try not to let it happen again. They don't realize the toil, the sweat, and all that you put into raising that animal and getting it used to you, all the years and the time that went into that. Because they don't grasp the concept of living the life that we call the homesteading lifestyle. So therefore, I don't see dogs and cats as being a farm animal, in a sense that they can just be allowed to roam freely on the farm. To me, those two animals need to be contained until needed to be used. Now, you know, cattle, goats, and sheep, and hogs, and all this kind of stuff, they should have their boundaries and they should have their fencing and everything, so that on the home place, they all know where they belong. They're not allowed to roam on the neighbor's property or anywhere like that. They should have a facility and a place where they have perimeters and boundaries in which they stay on the home place. And this is one of the mental blocks I see that has happened with the people moving into the country from the urban areas. They don't understand that the first thing you do when you buy a piece of property is you just take the time and go ahead, and the money, and go ahead and put you up a fence around your whole place before you ever start doing anything else. Once your property's fenced, then you're in a position to begin to get some kind of animals. But until that property is fenced, you have no business with animals. Because all you're going to do is create tension between you and your neighbors. And then once that tension happens from the beginning, most generally speaking, you and a neighbor will never ever get along like you should. So, in talking about the old home place, the old timers realized this stuff. And if you went and looked, most of the old home places has some kind of old fencing around them. And each animal had its own paddocks. And they were contained within those places. And the problem I see today is people who are looking for a place to call a home place, and yet they want animals. They're trying to put too many animals in too small of a piece of property. And they're going out and they're having to buy everything that they feed those animals. And if an LCE happens, then the problem that you have is that you're not going to be able to feed those animals, and you're not going to be able to take care of them. So we have to realize that with purchasing a home place comes responsibility and understanding with it. We have to understand that if I have, like me, I have 10 acres here. A portion of it's wooded with oak trees. It's a great acorn mast source for wildlife and pigs. And I also have a running stream system that runs through my property. Fantastic for the hogs. They stay in the watered area. They stay in the wet area down there. There's also a section of it fenced off where I have 2 cows right now. They roam on a few acres here. Those cows stay in that few acres. They go back and forth to that stream. They get their water. I have a few goats that stays on another part of the property, and they eat in a specific place. I have chickens that stay in a pen in the back. I have turkeys that stay in a pen, and yet some of them free range, all in the back, and yet there's a part of my property that's used for a garden. Actually, I have 5 gardens on my property because I have different gardens for different things all over the place because of cross-pollination issues if I want to save my seeds. So if you're going to have a homestead, that's the reason I said this at I was asked this question at the Appalachian Conference 2 or 3 years ago, how many acres would I classify as the beginning acreage for a homestead? And I made a comment at that time that I thought 10 acres would be a good place to start at. But if you could do more, it would be great. And actually, another gentleman spoke up, and he said, actually during the older times, in the early years, you needed at least 2 acres per person in the household to be able to feed them with just a garden. I didn't realize those statistics was out there on the older lifestyle. But this Jim Buckman or Buckmeyer, or however you say his name, he's the one who actually, I think, came up with that and said that he had read it and studied it. And there's so much truth to that, because Wanda and I have 5 gardens on our property, and these 5 gardens produce just enough food for us to last for a year and put up a little bit more for a few years in advance of that, should there be a crop failure, and have a little bit to feed the animals and stuff like that. Now, a little corn to make cornmeal out of, and some grits and stuff like that, a little corn to feed the animals. So it takes it, guys, and yet we don't have enough land to do what I want to do. I would love to have a couple more cows, a couple more goats, a few more pigs. But on my 10 acres here, I know better than to do that, because then I would be having to buy everything that I fed these animals. And it's just not sustainable. So the old home place is a place that's built over time. It doesn't come overnight. You don't just move there and it's all of a sudden a home place. There's years of toil and sweat that goes into building things on a homestead. You know, you've got a home that has to be put on there and built. There's barns that need to be built. There's sheds that need to be built. Maybe a pond, all kinds of fencing for paddocks, perimeter fencing, corrals, loading chutes, just milking places, you know, for both goats, milking places for cows, farrowing places for pigs if you have pigs, chicken pens, a facility to butcher your animals, a smokehouse, a salt place where you can salt your meat and stuff like that for curing, and all these kind of things. It takes a lifetime to build a home place. And yet there's so many people, I think, today that think that to them it's most or less a fantasy to think that they're going to have a home place overnight. Now you can move and you can buy a piece of property, and perhaps you get one that's already set up and you don't have to do all this stuff, and you had enough money if you sold maybe another place and you went in and you bought a place and it's already pre-set up, and you one of the fortunate people in life. We don't all fit in that category. Most of us have to start small. Like me, I had to start very small. I lived in a little 12 by 56 house trailer for years. Then I upgraded to a 14 by 65 house trailer. Lived in it for several years. Then I had a little Jim Walters home built, a little 24 by 30 Jim Walters home built, and lived in it for about 5 years and realized that paying house notes wasn't for me. Sold it and realized I got shafted because I had a rule of 78 loan and was paying more for the house when I sold it than the actual money I borrowed. Taught me a valuable lesson about financing at that particular time, and I swore then, if the Lord was with me, I'm never going to pay another house note. And that was 30 years ago. To this day, I've never paid another house note. I've always built my homes. I've never lived in somebody else's house. I've always lived in my home. And that is the way life has been for me. But it's not to say that life can be like that for everybody, because everybody's circumstances is different. Some people don't have that luxury, some do. I've always tried to tell people, if you're gonna, especially if you're a young lady and you're trying to look for a guy, you need to find a guy who has the ability to build things, who is mechanically inclined. He has knowledge of tools and how tools work, and equipment and how equipment works and stuff like that, because someday, if you buy a home or you build a home or whatever, and you have to have repairs done on it, you need a man who knows how to do that kind of stuff. And I've always tried to tell people that. Now, not everybody does that, and I understand it, and that's perfectly fine. But in the older days, when people had home places, the man of the house knew how to do just about anything on a home place. Now, let's stop and think. Now, not every man could do everything. Like me, I have a syrup mill and I have a place to cook the syrup. Well, back in the older days, there was usually one person in the community who had a syrup mill. There was usually one person in the community, that same guy usually had a furnace. And all the people in the community would gather their cane and they would bring it there on certain days. And they would all take time as neighbors and they would squeeze and they would cook off the syrup. And they would all make a year's supply of syrup from one person in the neighborhood. Or the community. And it wasn't called neighborhoods, they were called communities. And then you might have one person in the community who's a blacksmith. And if you had a horse that needed shoeing, or if you had a plow point that needed drawing out, or something, one of your pieces of equipment broke, you could take a piece of metal over to him, and he was a blacksmith and he could fix it for you. But now not everybody in the community was a blacksmith. And you had a lot of people, like my grandfather was a cobbler on my mother's side. He used to fix people's shoes. And he stayed in business until the throwaway shoes came along, and he got to be too old. Because see, people used to fix their shoes. And a cobbler was a very important man in the community. But not everybody was a cobbler. He would fix everybody's shoes for them, because people would not have the money to go purchase new pairs of shoes. They would either have them resold or whatever. If they got something happened to them, they would have them fixed. Everybody in a community has a job, and that's where the old home places come into being. There were several people in a community, and all of them had a home place, and they all knew who did what, and they survived as a community. There's a mentality in this world today that I'm going to survive alone. I'm going to go find me a place way off in the back of nowhere, and I'm going to survive right by myself, and me and my family. Well, I don't want to bust your bubble, but if an LCE happens, you're not going to make it by yourself, probably. You need the support of a community, and that's what Deep South Homestead is all about. We're about building a community of people. Now, we may not all be in the same area. We may not be, within a mile of each other or 2 miles of each other or anything like that. But the community we're building here on YouTube is letting people know that in the place where you live, through our channel, you're able to locate people that's not too far from you, that you didn't even know existed. That is our desire. And our desire is to create the old home place again through people, and help them to understand what it's like to have an old home place, and what it's like to create a new old home place for your kids and your grandkids. Because I will assure you, the shape the world is getting in, if you get land, you better hang on to it, and you better teach your children to hang on to it, and your grandchildren to hang on to it, because the chances of them ever being able to afford land in the future is going to be very, very slim. Because if they have to buy land in the future, they'll be in debt their whole life and never know what it's like to live on a homestead. And we also need to understand that once we've taught our kids the importance of homesteads and what it's like to live on these homesteads, is to be content. The world has a lot of glitter out there. It's got a lot of toys out there. It's got a lot of stuff out there that's very appealing. But the end result is this. There's no happiness in that stuff. True contentment and true peace, first of all, comes through your Heavenly Father. And secondly, doesn't matter how much money you have, you need a place to call home. And you need a place to be content at. A place where you can feel safe. A place where you feel like, I belong. This is my home. This is where I should be at. And guys, that's what the old home place is really all about. Somewhere you feel comfortable. You don't feel like you're threatened. You don't feel like that you have to worry about if the LCE happens. You don't have to worry about it. You'll survive. You and your family will be okay because you've got a community around you of people that will pull together and that you can depend on to help you get through the hard times, and you can help them. Until then, you will never know what true contentment is. Don't go out there in the world thinking you're going to make it on your own and survive on your own, because if an LCE happens, you won't make it. Not very long anyway. Because at some point you got to go to sleep. And the world don't care if you're sleeping or not. They'll take what you have. So guys, that is the porch time for today. The old home place. Build one. Create that renewed sense in your kids and your grandkids. And in your own self. If you're looking for that place, don't settle until you know you found it. And once you found it, don't give it up for nothing. Stay there. Even if you have a bad neighbor that's trying to drive you up the wall, don't leave. Win. Winners never quit, and quitters never win. Be strong. Be of good courage. Be full of strength, full of character. Be the better person. You will win in the end. Guys, thank you for joining me on Porch Time today. And thank you from Deep South Homestead.